My name is Todd Carpenter. I'm the Executive Director of NISO, the National Information Standards Organization in the United States. And this is welcome to a sort of mini conversation about AI and its impact on scholarly communications. We're going to look at this from two different perspectives, AI and its impact on open access, and the second element is going to be AI and the impact on research integrity. So joining us today, I'm going to ask each of you just grab a mic and introduce yourselves. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I'm Leslie McIntosh. I'm the VP of Research Integrity at Digital Science.
Anita de Waard, she, her pronouns. I'm VP of Research Collaborations at Elsevier.
I'm Julia Kostova, and I'm Director of Publishing at Frontiers and the head of the US division there.
I'm Robert Harington. I'm Associate Executive Director at the American Mathematical Society, though I don't sound very American, but that's where I live.
I'm Roy Kaufman. I'm the Managing Director of Business Development at Copyright Clearance Center, and I do sound very American.
For those of you who saw the notice or the announcement about this program, we were supposed to have one more participant. One of our newest chefs, Avi Steinman, is unfortunately unable to join us because of the conflict in Israel. He's certainly disappointed to have to miss this, but he's remaining with his family in Jerusalem. He asked that we just take a moment and take a moment of silence and just think of hopefully a peaceful resolution in that part of the world. Thank you. So let's talk now about AI and its impact on open access. Our world is changing quite rapidly when it comes to artificial intelligence, and it's having a big impact on how content is created, how content is distributed, how content is surfaced, discovered, and artificial intelligence tools, natural language models, et cetera, are playing a big role in that. So let's start with you, Julia. Kind of how is AI impacting your organization? How is it impacting your workflows and the processes that you have at your organization?
Thank you very much for this question. So just to anchor my perspective a little bit, Frontiers is an open science publisher and platform, as well as an early adopter of AI, right? So we were one of the first organizations, the publishers, to develop proprietary AI-driven tools. This is back in 2019, right? So before all of us could use LLM in a sentence cogently. And so because of that, we've got this very deep-seated interest and certainly excitement about the possibilities around AI. The tools that we have developed are, I think they're becoming a lot more popular, a lot more typical in our industry as they look to address specific pain points in the workflows, whether it is around research integrity, whether it is around automation of certain tasks, certainly around dissemination. I do think, and I'm very excited about other opportunities that lie ahead as we really start to take advantage of this technology. I think if there is one realization here, it is that we're still very much in the beginning of open access of AI. OAI, I get those mixed up as we speak, but we're still very much in the beginning of this, and so where we've seen quite a bit of success is with some of these applications to solve specific issues like integrity checks or plagiarism checks, image manipulation checks. But we're really excited about other options in which are other solutions that might become available as the technology develops.
Robert?
So I work at the American Mathematical Society, as I mentioned a minute ago. The American Mathematical Society is a scholarly society, and we have 30,000 members. ranging from students through the highest level researchers in math around the world. And we also publish lots of stuff. So, we're talking journals, about 85 books a year and so on, a big database. So that's on the publishing side. As a society, we need to think about AI and how it affects not just the publishing sector, which is clearly where I'm coming from mostly, but we formed what we're calling an AI advisory group across the society. So it's led by a very eminent mathematician, Akshay Venkatesh, Fellow of the Royal Society and Fields Medal winner. And we have representation from different sectors like education and so on this group. And we're trying to we have more questions than anything else at this point, but we are trying to understand what implications of AI may be for research, for education, for publishing, for the community of mathematicians as they practice in general. And we're trying to break that down and sort of create some white papers or some groups of resources where we want to collaborate with other sister societies that are around us in fields such as more applied math or physics and so on, and computer science, so that we can see where some of the commonalities are for our academic worlds. And certainly mathematics is, I often find myself saying, well, mathematics is just different to everything else. Well, that's true in many respects, but I think there are commonalities that we're going to be facing. So I'm not going to go into great detail because I think I'm supposed to be not talking too much, which is actually very hard for me. But as far as thinking of things here, it'll be sort of thinking about copyright issues, and I know that Roy is going to address that. Thinking about teaching in terms of the courses and forums that are out there, even K through 12, kindergarten through 12 grade, as we call it in the States, education issues, and how are schools looking to do this. And then also actual tools that we might be able to use now to sort of help us be more efficient in some of our publishing production workflows. So there's a whole range of these things which we need to ask questions about, some long distance and some now. Maybe I should stop there.
And Roy?
So we'll get to copyright issues later. So the question, how does it affect our organization? To misquote an old film, 80% of the time I'm working on AI, 100% of the time. AI is, for me, what I spend my time on. And this is true about a very large portion of our organization. I mean, we are a licensing organization. We sit between 10,000 rights holders, mostly publishers on one side. Some of them are traditional subscription publishers or book publishers or newspaper publishers or fully open access publishers. And on the other side, tens of thousands of research organizations, copyright compliant corporations, and everyone's talking to us about AI all the time. So that's at the macro level. At the micro level, I keep thinking about the title. It's AI and its impact on OA, but we should also be talking about OA and its impact on AI, because people, when we started to get very involved in open access at CCC, people are always saying, well, copyright's in your name. What are you doing with open access? And I'm like, this is the only form of publishing I'm aware of where licensing, copyright licensing, is at the core, debated as to, it's copyright, it's CC BY, NC. Part of the definition of OA is a license, and we're a licensing organization. So, I look at OA very much from the license structure, what it means, what our users can do, what our publishers have authorized, what they want to authorize in different ways. So these are the things we're thinking about. Thank you.
Great. And just so that you all know, we've kind of split this conversation, and I'm not ignoring our friends on the right. They'll be engaging in the second half of the conversation. So Roy, kind of leading off of that, your point there, we have artificial intelligence impacting, content is, open access content is a tool for improving artificial intelligence. So let's dig first into that side of this equation. In what ways do you see the development of natural language models being benefited from the prevalence and increasing availability of open access. The sort of it's start from OA's impact on AI, and we'll obviously get into the flip side of that equation.
Absolutely. So it's sort of funny, if you go back 10 years, one of the things that was starting to drive the flip to open access was a lot of demands from funders and researchers that articles not only be available, but they would be available for human readers and for text and data mining rights. And we sort of forgotten about that because we now say AI, we used to call it text and data mining, and they're still together, but they're a little bit more confused now. So I always felt that that was one of the drivers. According to a recent STM report, about 35% of science is published openly. Now, I'm being very careful with my terms here. So I don't, you'd have to look a little deeper to say how much of this is Creative Commons attribution versus Creative Commons non-commercial attribution versus Creative Commons attribution non-commercial non-derivative. These are the Creative Commons licenses that are typically attached to open science and open access materials. And each of them, from a legal perspective, because I am a lawyer, has a different meaning to what an LLM can do based on, is it a commercial LLM, a non-commercial LLM? Are they creating derivative works? Are they training? And all of these come into place. And then there's, of course, the meta fact that a lot of the people who have trained LLM so far don't really care what their license says and what the copyright law says. That's a bigger issue. But, certainly certainly open access has enabled training, in a way that has been permitted. There's a little question around attribution. We can get to that later, but it has empowered that. And you can just point to, you can train an LLM on a lot of open content that exists, and it's high quality open content from high quality publishers, versions of record.
Do you want to jump in as a provider of high quality content?
Absolutely. I mean, so I'll leave the legal intricacies to Roy to comment on, but just from a bigger, broader perspective here. You talked about how the availability of high quality open access content has really driven the growth of some of these models, right? And when we talk about high quality content, of course, we mean multiple things. For example, the fact that it is validated, peer reviewed, vetted in some ways, but also that it is well structured, that it is enriched with metadata that makes it easier to ingest, manipulate, and so on and so forth. So from my perspective, this is precisely the kind of data that we want to be, feeding and training algorithms on, right? Accurate data, and not just some Facebook corpus there that gets ingested with results that could be quite questionable. So from the broader perspective here, I think this is precisely the kind of data sets that we need to ensure is being fed into those, right, to those models. And so the development then of AI, I think for me, really highlighted, I guess, the value of high quality open access material out there, data out there. And in fact, Frontiers is a main source for the Google C4 data set, right, which is what they trade their algorithms on. And not only did it highlight it, but I think it highlighted the need for more of it. Just if we think about this in a broader, more society at large kind of a perspective.
Yeah, we certainly want these AI models. We certainly want them trained on, not just anything on the internet, which is unfortunately how some of these problems start, but having a source of real trusted content. Robert, anything you would like to add from that?
Yeah, I mean, it touches on. I mean, it's worth remembering that when you're thinking of certainly in mathematics and maybe in computer science, this is not new, actually. So, there's what's it called? The neural symbolic network, AI Slack forum. We're talking about actually machine learning and algorithms and computer software that's already open, feeding into the development of AI itself. So that's something we just need to bear in mind. We're sort of looking at it from the content that we publish, but in many areas, we're actually feeding AI with open content. I mean, on the teaching level, say I'm called Alice, and Alice has essentially got some, asks a language model a question, and from that, she receives, or I receive, if I'm called Alice, I receive some results back from an AI engine that I then feed into my own lecture notes. And much of that content is not going to have attribution. It's likely it's going to have both attributed and non-attributed content. Some of that's going to be completely open content. And then I'm going to be authoring my own lecture notes as Alice. And I'm going to honestly feel like that's all mine. I'm not going to know, in fact, what I've got in my hand and how it should be attributed. So the licensing piece of all of this, I would say, is something I think it's going to lead to a change in copyright law, because I don't think we can actually use Creative Commons licenses effectively in an AI setting. I think it's essentially going to evaporate in that context. And you could argue, I suppose, in the future that attribution may not be a force. And so what does copyright law mean in a future of AI? And that's, I think we often forget that actually having these licenses, I mean, maybe this is an overly simplistic way of looking at it. So I'm looking at Roy, who knows his stuff on this. But, in terms of copyright is always there. It's not going away. It's a legal force. And licenses are just a part of the copyright story. So that's where I would sort of start, at least on that.
Well, Roy, let's dig into. I don't want to turn this into a conversation about copyright and AI, because we could do a whole panel on that.
I did one yesterday.
Once, twice.
It was an hour.
Yeah. So, but I think some of these questions about attribution and licensing and open access, as you said, the idea of open access has a lot to do with licensing. So why don't we dig a little bit into this? Some of the questions about Creative Commons licenses. What does attribution mean for an AI system?
Yeah, and the good thing is I can ask the question because I do not have the answer. So fundamentally, will copyright law change because of AI? I can name 5 countries where it has. Every other country with copyright law where it hasn't. We could debate whether it needs to. I think there was a sense that it needed to. Those 5 countries were a little early. And I think now it's actually pushing the other way to say copyright is robust. But what may very well change is it's really more policy. Open access has been defined by the application of Creative Commons licenses, and there are terms and conditions. And from an author's perspective, what someone says if they adopt a Creative Commons is, you're allowing people to reuse your content in a whole lot of different ways. And the value you get back is it will always be attributed. And when a large language model is built on, we've aggregated a corpus, I think, of 5 million CC by XML articles at CCC. How are you giving attribution to that? What is your attribution requirement? And now are you going to say to the authors, yeah, we promised if you gave it away for free, you'd at least get attribution, and now you're not getting attribution. So I had two very interesting conversations, and then I'll stop talking. One was, someone who was discussing this in front of authors. They're like, wait. You mean I'm okay with the CC by license, but I don't want my material being used to train an LLM. And the answer is like, yeah, kind of too bad. And then the second thing was a learned society who had adopted a CC by license model that was published by a larger publisher, who again said the same thing. And it was again sort of like, yeah, we're okay with this, but we don't like that. It's like, well, the CC license is very broad. Now, what is that attribution requirement? I will say there is a lawsuit pending in the United States. It's a class action, and it means they'll probably get dismissed on procedural grounds involving not the CC licenses, but similar licenses for software, open software licenses. And it was brought by people who had created open software licenses. That software was strung together to create, to create text and data mining AI software. And the attribution was stripped out. And they said, okay, we're suing you for copyright infringement because the license requires the attribution. So there is at least a real case right now pending in an analogous situation.
So let's flip this around and think of think of AI as a tool for generating open access content. What are the implications in our community for AI as a tool to generate content? How is that going to affect the open science? How are AI tools going to affect open science in a meaningful way? Where do we go from here? Julia?
Thanks for this question. I guess the way that I would think about it is not narrowly in terms of AI becoming a tool for generating content exclusively, but rather, a series of tools that might meet different needs. So earlier on, we talked about, or we touched on some of the ways in which AI tools and solutions are helping solve certain, processes, problems, or streamline, automate parts of the workflows, and so on and so forth. I think that is really important. The dissemination aspect is really important. But the way that I'd like to think about it is in terms of what can this technology do to enable or enhance or speed up or expand the open science practices, right? As a part of the open science movement, right? So not just talking about access, but really talking about practices. And so, there's some movement in that direction, but things that I'm really kind of looking forward to, as you can tell, I'm quite bullish about this, is are around data. Data is one of my hobby horses because I do think that it is an extraordinarily valuable, and I'm talking about research data, I should say, in this particular case. But I'm happy to talk about any data that Todd would let me talk about. But research data, I think, in my view, is one of those extremely valuable resources that remains largely untapped. For a variety of reasons, right? I mean, in many cases, it just gets relegated to supplemental material section and it kind of stays there. I imagine ways in which AI technologies could allow, very active, interesting ways of data extraction, data organization, data curation, so that this data becomes a lot more useful, right? Than just, maybe you could even use that at some point to kind of run in a rudimentary way, some experiments or some validation steps in silico. I mean, that would be the kind of thing that I am thinking about, that I get really excited about, not just in terms of AI as a content generator.
Robert?
It's a funny question because I think of open access as being a very specific thing. So, open access is, we have models for open access content that are, it's essentially a business model, if you want to put it that way. It might be a gold, article processing charge model, or a green model. Or a diamond model where everything's freely available. I sort of prefer to think of it not so much as open access as openness in general, and how that can enhance, if we're trying to be optimistic as opposed to pessimistic, enhance open science, and how science actually reaches different parts of the world and different stratospheres of populations. So, for example, the Brookings Institution recently came out with an interesting study of kindergarten through 12th grade education. One example they gave was of New York City public schools that were deciding how to think about AI. And at first they kind of banned AI in the classroom, and then they reversed that decision a few months later and embraced it fully and integrated it into their classroom. And that's going to allow for a lot more content that's open, and generated content that's opened in the process of teaching, whether it be math or any other discipline. So I can easily imagine that there's a sort of democratization of knowledge that may occur through AI that influences openness. But I'm not sure I can equate that with just open access.
It's interesting. I don't want to get into it, but we actually have a license that we license to school districts, which allows them to use content in AI technologies, and they do really interesting stuff. But sort of at the larger level question, I work with news publishers, and I am closely related on copyright stuff with other segments like music, where there's a fundamental threat that a lot of the content that comes out of the machine will replace the content that now comes out of the humans. And in some cases, some people are embracing that. When I look at science publishing, I am an optimist, because I think, with the exception of the next panel, which is going to talk about the implications of all of this stuff, and those are real. I think of the scientific article as an artifact. The value of the scientific article isn't necessarily the way the words have been strung together. The value of the scientific artifact is that it's reporting out research that has been done. And that once that research has been done, the author is expressing her opinion as to what that research means. So when you think of AI and you have a lot of authors who might not be native English speakers, but they're publishing in English language journals and the like. So the ability of an AI to actually generate an article, as long as the fundamental research has been done by the human, and as long as the human says, yeah, this reflects what I think this research means, that's the value of the article. And so it does, I think, make writing articles easier in some cases. And I don't think, maybe this is controversial, it fundamentally matters that you're using an authoring tool, for example, like a Gen AI system. So I tend to think that's good. And then just on the other side, if you think about, you still need that human intervention always. And one of the points I always make is there's a number of studies I've read, and I'm not a data scientist and I don't know how to code, that talk about how if you train AI on AI generated matter, it ultimately leads to a collapse because it sort of feeds itself in. And I think that's how I understand it. Again, it sort of leads to this model collapse. So, you need, even if you want Gen AI, you always need that human intervention. And the human intervention, again, in the science, is less about the word selection and much more about reporting out the research and your own conclusions. And I think that survives. So that's why I'm pretty optimistic about the scientific article in an AI world, subject to some of the risks around ethics and the like. Research integrity.
So perfect lead in to the second part of our conversation. Can we grab just so we don't have to fight. I've got one. We've got the mic settled. So we want to start first of all by level setting so that we all understand. So let's talk about start with the value. What's the real value for research integrity in scholarly communications? Let's just start with a very brief why do we care?
Well, do we care about trust in the research? And when I say research, I do mean the scholarly research. And to me, this is the foundation level. If you picture the iceberg and all we see is the tip of the iceberg, research integrity is that foundation. Pretend like it's a triangle. We'll get to that in a second. But that is at our core. And the written word is how we communicate. We communicate through other methods as well, but that is what is translated throughout history and throughout time. And we need to hold on to that.
Thanks. So I think, to me, the integrity of research has to do with the fact that research is authentic as in there is someone actually doing something. It's original. It's not a copy of something someone else did. And it's well-intentioned. So it's not intended to push a political point or make someone money. It is intended to explore the world. I completely agree with Leslie that it is at the basis of all science. And the way we think about it is, in essence, scholarly communications is built on this foundation of research integrity. We think at Elsevier that it is absolutely critical that we as science publishers and people who share scientific information do everything within our ability to identify that an article indeed is authentic and well-intentioned and original. We also think that the flip side of research integrity, the flip side of preventing evil, is promoting good. So we do believe that one of the best ways to do this is to encourage reproducible research. And to us, that's the next step up on the triangle of trust. You have research integrity. On top of that, you have robust research. So you identify reproducible elements. You identify entities that have been used. You identify which equipment has been used, et cetera, et cetera. And so you enhance reproducibility. So we do think that in encouraging reproducibility and encouraging the good, as it were, we can also enable this research integrity using persistent identifiers, using lots of open science techniques that maybe we'll get into in a bit.
Anything you would add?
I mean, I don't think that I will argue or disagree with anything that was said. I mean, other than to perhaps mention that, you know, as publishers, I do think that it is our social purpose as a business to ensure the integrity of the research, of the scientific record, right? And so that is why we invest so much in, and this is time, effort, ideas, in making sure that as the ecosystem evolves, so does our response and what we do to ensure that indeed the research that we publish is valid and top notch.
Mm-hmm.
So using that as a base, let's dig into this question of artificial intelligence and natural language models and that suite of technology. How is it impacting in a positive way or potentially negative ways our trust in the scholarly communications?
So I will give my, I started a company called Repeta, which has now been acquired by Digital Science. And we used AI to develop algorithms to look for trust markers within research outputs. So in manuscripts is where we started out for. So obviously I believe in using a way to speed up the checks in science and scholarship so that we can move on to understand the concepts that we should be thinking about and hopefully to improve improve our world. So I believe absolutely that we should use algorithms to do that. Now, I also firmly believe in human decision making. So this is computer augmented human decision making, because humans are also behind the algorithms, and we need to understand and not forget about the biases that could be in those algorithms as well. And so there is that balance between those. And it's if we, before November, we were talking as a community in the world, talking about biases that are in algorithms, and that stopped, or it seemed to have stopped when ChatGPT came out, and that can't stop. It has to continue. I can tell you that I had a diverse group of engineers who still work on it, but many were in countries that were non-English speaking. And the minute you start to have them think about, part of my group was in Costa Rica, and you think about different names, different accents, the way people do research, we have to take those into consideration before we make judgments as humans on what we were doing, the tools that we were building, and how we were using them.
Can I ask the audience a question? Who here is afraid of AI? Even a little bit? Nobody? Oh, quite a few people. Thank you. And who here is afraid of search engines? Okay. Couple. Okay.
Search engines or Google?
No. Google, big companies, is a different thing, but search engines in general. So I think it's incredibly interesting why specifically AI is engenders fear and loathing among a huge section of the population. I think, in a sense, AI is kind of like we humans are storytellers, and we have long told the story of something that is not alive that we imbue with life. The story of Gollum, an ancient Jewish myth, is one of these, where a clay statue is created, life is breathed into it with a word, and now we think it threatens to take over our villages. So I think AI is much like that. The difference between a search engine and the large language models, I think, is that it tells us stories, right? It takes this human ability of storytelling and it suddenly spits it out at us. You ask ChatGPT to tell you anything and it will. And so I think there is something that we can learn about our innate human idea that's what tells stories has agency. So I think we assign a lot of agency to some of these tools precisely because they are capable of telling stories. So all of that to say that I think we can definitely use AI to think about what makes us human. I had a really interesting conversation yesterday with some literary publishers about what makes a unique creative work. What is the worth of an author? Can that be duplicated by a machine? If it does, why does that matter? Why do we care? So I completely agree with Leslie. We need to maintain very, very vigilant because there is evil in the world, a lot of it caused by humans. There's a great or horrible example of bias in an algorithm that detects faces. And the algorithm was coded on a data set. We did a session on AI and gender identity. The algorithm was coded on a data set of faces, and these had been annotated with two genders. One was man, and the other was attractive female. And this was the mental model of the person making the data set. And it went into the AI, right? So the evil wasn't caused by the technology. The evil was caused by the biased assumptions that were then fed into the technology. So I completely agree. There are many ways in which we can utilize this technology. We shouldn't assign it agency. We should realize that we can indeed enable it to work for good as well.
I know, I'm butting in on the other section.
Wait a minute.
But I just wanted, because I am afraid, mind you, I'm afraid, well, look, there's a mouse, kind of afraid. But part of the fear of AI for me is like actually the way we will relate to each other as humans is going to change. So in terms of like even how we publish and how we relate to our peers in publishing, how we manage staff, and how we interact with content. It's going to be open. It's going to be AI-generated content. I think we're going to sort of land in this rather great position in some ways of being just human curators. We're going to apply something else, our soul, to this content, if you like. So that is going to be hard to get to grips with. I'm actually not sure where it's going to lead us, but that's the other portion of human interaction with AI in an open setting.
So, Julie, back to the question of research integrity: is the positivity, potential, and are there potential negatives?
Yeah. No, I mean, this is an interesting discussion. And I don't know that, any of us has, a crystal ball to see how this is all going to pan out or unravel. But I mean, I certainly appreciate the dangers around, synthetic media. I certainly appreciate that storytelling, to your point, and is kind of how we relate to one another, and that may change, should the way that we produce and create some of these stories change as well. I think, in my day job, I need to look at this a little bit more pragmatically, right? And so from a pragmatic point of view, I think, I don't want us to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Because, and I think this is something that you guys echoed, that you guys said already as well. So from my perspective, if we think that, or if we fear that, that this powerful technology, potentially has the ability to accelerate the creation of, fake content or manipulated content. And this, by the way, is plausible not just in the context of scholarly communications, but more broadly speaking. Then I do think that, we want to try and harness this technology to, say, detect some of that more effectively, right? I think one of the things that we want to avoid is where, synthetic media just gets generated at a rate here, hitherto unseen, and we're still doing things, in a way that is outdated and that really isn't allowing us to deal with some of these issues. So, in the context specifically of research integrity, I mentioned earlier that Frontiers, had developed a tool to kind of identify, perhaps flag up a certain quality or inconsistencies upstream, right? So things like undeclared conflict of interest, which is a big thing in our world. Things like maybe data depositing that wasn't that isn't done properly. Certainly plagiarism, image manipulations. All of these things are really at the core of what we do and how science gets created, right? And so we're certainly committed to investing a lot more in that, because we do think that this is a helpful approach. But as Leslie said, this is technology enabling, human decision making, human evaluation. This is not, especially in these early days of technology. I think this is an important point to make and to take away, that nobody's handing over science to ChatGPT, right? And so, yeah.
So building on that, Leslie, do you want to talk about some of the tools that your organization applies using AI in support of research integrity?
So I already gave my disclaimer. So we have actually integrated the trust markers, so these quality checks within dimensions at Digital Science. So we can now detect over 33 million full text documents, whether they have indicators of trust. So looking up some things about the authors, that's where I would say that you start with that trust is the authors, and then transparency of scholarly communication, of ethical statements, if you should have them, funding statements, things that aren't really, they have nothing to do with the reproducibility of the science, but the trust that you have within the research process, and then into those items that really foster reproducibility. Can you look at the data availability statement? Can you find the data? Ruthie, my engineer, called it data at the end of the rainbow. And we're looking for these things. And that has been automated. And I was very fortunate to have that be applied to dimensions. So that's one of the tools that we're using that I can give you an example of.
Fantastic.
We also have many tools to check for research integrity, but I do think I love the word that you used, which was harnessing. I think one of the things, in two ways, I think we're very invested and interested in harnessing the power of AI. One is that we are active participants in standards bodies, and I'm not just pointing at you, Todd, but we are actually involved in a NISO effort to change the fundamental format of the scientific paper, content profile with linked data, which says if we have a piece of scientific text, can we develop a format so that we can layer on top of it any type of annotation and any type of check that we do? We believe very strongly that as publishers, we have a responsibility to add the provenance of any checks we do so that people can indeed see we have checked that there is no plagiarism. We have checked that this is actual data, that this person really has this, is working at this institution. On the other hand, we can also then enrich it. So there can be changes that can be made, for instance, by showing the data or formulating the data in a different language or in a different type format. But all of these layers of annotation conversation can be added, and they can be tailored and focused for the specific user who is using it. So I think that's a standard that you maybe don't think of in the context of AI, but it's actually very critical. I think harnessing these technologies within frameworks that allow the separation of the formation of the content with the annotations that we give and the checks that we give is really, really critical. But I want to mention one more thing, because I think one of the coolest ways in which at Elsevier we've used AI is we have a tool called Shadow Health, which develops interactive environments for teaching nurses. And Shadow Health works as in there's a virtual environment, a nursing student walks in and has a dialogue with a patient. So it simulates patient encounters. And we have developed a Shadow Health module that has patient encounters with patients who have non-binary or transgender gender identities and who have very specific requests and needs of the nurses that they interact with. And there was actually a great study done by Shadow Health that showed that nursing students who had interacted with this software were more sensitive to the needs of people with non-binary and transgender identities than people who hadn't done that. And AI allowed us to generate hundreds and thousands of types of conversations that were simulated, but that were very realistic. So I think that's a huge opportunity, which I'm really excited to explore more about.
Yeah. Just kind of thinking about the opportunities here in the last couple minutes of where might this go? Like what kind of vision do you have for how AI might help support research integrity moving forward? Do you have any grand visions?
I mean, I do have grand visions, but I think we only have a couple of minutes left, so I'll focus on just a couple of wish list here. A couple of items on my wish list. I mean, as I said, I do acknowledge that we're still in the very beginning of this, but I personally would like to see a lot more tools that support researchers throughout their, research creation process, right? And so I talked earlier about data because it is not really just about, say, guiding a researcher to the right journal, with some kind of a technology, right? I think it really is about kind of enforcing, enhancing, driving forward some of these, open science practices. I think data for me is probably like top on my wish list. I would really love to see, more sophisticated tools, and they are coming. I mean, there's some already exist that really allow the extraction of the insights and the wisdom in data. Because I think this is something that could have really serious practical implications, right? I mean, if you don't have, we've seen this, for example, in drug development, right? You don't have to, spend, 10 years mixing compounds, right? You could start by modeling that, in silico, and only then figuring out where you go from here. I mean, this is the kind of stuff could really accelerate discovery. It could really accelerate research, and I think can help us tackle or maybe even solve some of the crises that we are facing as a society and as a world.
Thank you. So I think that the forces for good can be used for the forces of evil. And we have to think about, as we open up science, as science is communicated between and out of the ivory tower and into the community and back, what are those filters that we put in there, whether they use AI or not? However we do that, we cannot forget that piece. Because I actually want to go back to open access for just a second, because there's some free water outside if you would like. It's in the mine, in the river, right? And I'm happy to give you any of it. Would you drink it? Would you consume it unfiltered, unchecked? I would say most people would probably say no if you know anything about any open river at this time. That is the same thing that needs to happen as we develop or as any new technology comes along. We can use it for those checks, but we can't miss that piece. We can't talk about what's being done to us, but what are we doing with this new world that we live in? Because I do try to be an optimist, but democracy does not happen without those checks. We can talk about AI and helping us in the good to allow for the democratization of information and the advent for a lot of people. But the truth is, that's not where our world is going right now. And we have the power as the holders of knowledge and the written information to affect that change. And I think we can and should.
Beautiful.
Anita, I'll give you the last word.
Oh my goodness, that's always dangerous. I completely agree that we need to harness this technology for good. So I think we need to talk to the monster and not fear it. We need to have communication with it. I am very interested, I think Roy, you mentioned it, or maybe Robert did, in efforts that are currently being done. There's a lab started right now in the Netherlands by Frank van Harmelen and a number of colleagues that is called Human in the Loop AI, that is looking at the ways in which AI can actually support research. So you're talking about supporting research at every single level, from helping to prepare and to store the ways in which methods are done, to the way to which analytics has been done, to the way in which these have been analyzed. I think actually, if we really set our minds to it, AI can help us tremendously weed out human biases, which are non-negligible, where there's a lack of equality, there's a lack of openness that can really be supported by AI. So I do believe that if we harness it for good, we can actually gain a lot of ground. But it is important, I think, that we all open ourselves up and that we really start to learn a little bit about how does this work and how can we use it, and explore our own humanity through the use of AI, while maintaining indeed these harnessing forces. We have a series of responsible AI practices that are practiced across Reed Elsevier, LexisNexis. I'd love to see the entire STM community get together and define a series of responsible AI practices that we can all assign, that we can all agree on. I think that's something that could be super useful for everyone around the table, but also everybody in the audience to think about what are the principles that we want to use to really utilize this future.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And my own organization, NISO, hosted a meeting in Washington 2 weeks ago on artificial intelligence and how can we as a community develop best practices in our community. How can we affect the conversations here? And in the course of that day-long conversation, we kind of came up with about 14 different ideas about how we can make change. And it's interesting that, as a technology organization, most of the suggested ideas were focused around trust. How do we trust the data going into the models? How do we trust the models? How do we track credit, authorship? What was the role of AI in the development of this scholarly output? My sense is that trust and integrity is really the next generation in terms of how we will apply artificial intelligence tools in our space. So with that, I recognize that we are just about on time. I would like to thank Roy, Robert, Julie, Leslie, Anita. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you all. I would be remiss if I didn't do a quick shout out for the Society for Scholarly Publishing. Thank you all for SSP for organizing the session. Thank you to our friends at the Frankfurt Book Fair for hosting us today. I hope you all have a fantastic and productive rest of your conference. Thank you.